Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the second of our joint webinars on how we get the visitor economy. Particularly today, we're going to focus on how do we start getting the visitor economy open for business. But we know in this first session, I'm delighted to welcome Matt Ashton, who's the Director of Public Health for Liverpool, Suzanne Grant, who's the Director of Merseyrail, and Natalie Haywood from the Leaf Group. This first section is about really how do we look at the various elements of the visitor economy, and particularly from the public health aspect. As we know, at the core of all of this is a little virus called COVID-19. And I wanted particularly, Matt, from your role leading the city's response to COVID-19, can you tell us what we've been through, what we're up to at this moment in time, and how you perceive, given the government have changed the guidance now, there's some opening up, started yesterday, we've got some clear guidance documents coming out now for each sector, how you perceive that we will operate within that area at this moment in time within the city?
Sure. Hi everyone. Look, it's been a really traumatic period this for everybody across the whole country, and I think particularly in the Northwest. As we all know, the Prime Minister has outlined his plans for us exiting lockdown, which is encouraging because we start to have a plan about what the future roadmap might look like. And I think we have to recognise, though, that there's been a high level of impact across the country, and particularly in the Northwest, and I'll talk about that a little bit, Bill, if that's okay. And what we have to be really, really careful of is not putting us at risk of re-entering that kind of critical response phase again. So the Prime Minister's talked about levels of infections coming down and levels of deaths coming down, numbers of deaths coming down, and that's absolutely right. It isn't consistent across the whole country, though. There are regional and local variations within that. So London experienced an earlier peak, which is probably to be expected, and has come down the other side of that epidemic curve quite well now. That doesn't mean there's no infections, it just means there's much less of them. In the Northwest, our outcomes as a result of COVID have been quite bad, so we've been quite, in relative terms, quite badly hit. Lots of excess mortality, perhaps over and above what you would expect to see even with COVID. Our epidemic curve happened slightly later, and we're still coming down the other side, so we're not kind of out of the woods yet, if that makes sense. I can talk through the numbers just very briefly. So for Merseyside, we've had just under 5,000 positive tests, positive diagnoses of COVID. And that's, bear in mind that the tests are done predominantly in care homes and in hospitals, not in community. So that only indicates positive cases in those settings, not across the whole of the area. The hospitals, the NHS side of it, did really well. It wasn't overrun as a result of us locking down and stopping the infection spreading. So the NHS, on an NHS perspective, it's managed to cope pretty well. Loads of really hard work and still some tragic stories within that, but the NHS has coped really well. Care homes have struggled. We've had lots of outbreaks in care homes and a few deaths as well, or a number of deaths, which obviously is very traumatic for everybody involved, including the staff themselves. We are getting a tighter grip on care homes and making sure that they are getting the support they need to minimise those infections and that transmission as much as possible. And just in terms of deaths, we've had over 1,000 deaths in Merseyside so far. That's split about 70%, 30%. So 30% of those deaths being in care homes, but 70% being through hospital, but as a result of people being admitted from the community. And we know that there are some parts of our communities that are more adversely affected than others. So I guess we've done well as a system to manage this as best as we possibly can, but the impact has still been pretty big. And the last thing we want to do after having that kind of period of lockdown, which has had a big impact on all of us, it's had a big impact on a personal level, but it's had a big impact on businesses, a big impact on the economy. And of course, there is a direct relationship between the economy and health and well-being. So we need the economy to be up and running in order to help people's health and well-being, both individually in terms of income and personal health, but also at a population level. So economy is really, really important in this. But if we open up too early and without taking the necessary measures, there is a risk that we might have to go back down into some kind of lockdown measure, which would be devastating for everybody. And I think that's the point really, Bill, is we have to be cautious and careful as we do this lockdown exit in order that we get this right, because we do not want to go back to where we've been.
There's a question just popped up actually, which is a general question. It was a question about how many have died in care homes. Well, you've said about 30% of those 1,000. So
yeah, I'll probably leave it at that if that's okay, Bill, because there are sensitivities around putting exact numbers out there. That's not about being secretive. It's just making sure that the data is the most up to date that is being published. So it is published via ONS. The Office of National Statistics are now releasing that data on a weekly basis. So if people want to have a look at that, go to ONS, and the ONS Twitter feed is particularly good for that.
Okay. Thanks for that, Matt. So, Matt, clearly the absolute control of this needs to be paramount in all of our planning. That we don't want this second spike, which clearly we're all planning the foreseeable future. It's anticipated that that might happen. So, given the guidance notes that you've seen coming out of government now, what role will the city have in ensuring that we, each of the sectors and the particular businesses, can open up in accordance with those guidance?
Yeah, so if I just come on to that, Bill, I think just thinking about what that roadmap might look like, we are absolutely concerned about a second spike and then a third spike. And I think people understand the reasons why. The long-term answer to this is hopefully through the development of a vaccine. And if we get a vaccine done, then that will obviously help protect people. And I think the impact of COVID so far, I would expect there would be a high uptake to that vaccine if one is developed. But there's just a note of caution around this. So firstly, we're talking probably 12 to 18 months for the development of any vaccine. There's loads of amazing work going on across the whole world and in Liverpool. Liverpool's leading the way on this, but there's no guarantee we will get a vaccine. And so that's kind of like the keep your fingers crossed, touch wood type scenario. What we will get is a better treatment regime. So lots of work going on around this to understand what drugs are the most effective in treating COVID, which will take down the impact of COVID. So that's a good thing. And the way that we will get to this is by having large-scale mass testing. So mass testing that understands where the virus is in our communities and then kind of acting on it really, really quickly. So you isolate the person, isolate the people they've been in contact with, cut off the transmission routes. So testing is absolutely critical to this. In terms of what that means for us as an economy then, there's something about how we open up the economy, my view, in a step-by-step way, as safe as possible, that minimizes the risk of transmission of the virus in any and all of our settings. So there probably are some quite simple messages in there, which is if people are unwell, if they have symptoms of COVID, but frankly of anything right now, they should not be out of the house. They need to be self-isolating until they are better. Social distancing, we just need to be cautious about our contact with people, because one of the big things about the virus is on average, the first 5 days of you having that virus, you don't know you've got it, there's no symptoms, and you can be passing it on to other people. And that's why the social distancing measures are so important. So doing things, but doing things in a safe way, that 2 meter gap. And if you're not able to have that kind of 2 meter separation, then the face coverings to make sure that if you've got something, you're not passing it on to other people. And then within that, really strong, consistent messages around hand hygiene, infection control, and kind of good behavior, for want of a different word, so that we are all acting and behaving in the same way, and so we can build confidence up that the city is reopening, but doing it in the right way and in as safe as way as possible.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for that. And so talking about how we do things in a safe way, one of the things we need to do is bring people into town. And if I can turn to Suzanne, because at the heart of this, we know we have a great public transport network in the city, but government are advising at the moment, because of demand, that public transport is not going to be, it's not going to be back to the levels that we knew it before COVID. Suzanne, can you just talk us through how Merseyrail are planning to respond to the opening up?
Yeah, so thanks, Fit, and good afternoon, everyone. So from Merseyrail's perspective, our priority has been to provide the most reliable service we can for those key workers and people who are making essential journeys. We have been impacted by COVID-19 ourselves, and we've had staff who've had the virus, who've had to self-isolate and shield also, and stay at home. So because of that, we had to reduce our services to prevent short notice cancellations, and we have been running a 12-hour service, so roughly from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock in the evening. We're now in a position where we have less staff needing to self-isolate, and following the government's announcements regarding lockdown restrictions starting to be lifted, we are beginning to increase our services. So it's still very much early days for us, and the government message is really clear that people should only travel by public transport if it's absolutely necessary, and to drive or walk if possible. And that's to allow those passengers who are travelling on our network who still need to stay apart and to socially distance. So from our perspective, from Monday, our services will be increasing, and we will be going back to running trains from what we call start of service, which is 6 o'clock in the morning, up until end of service, which is around 11 or 12 at night. We'll still be keeping a 30-minute frequency, but our priority now is to educate our passengers on this new norm that they'll be experiencing. So we are installing social distancing signage at our stations, and we're also beginning to communicate those key messages that Matt has just touched on. So it is only travel if our key message at the moment is only travel if it is absolutely necessary. As well, we're advising passengers to wear face coverings, to have good hand hygiene, to use contactless to payments, and to be responsible. Moving forward and looking to the future, giving passengers confidence to travel when it's safe to do so will be a priority for us, and that will be through effective communication and partner working as well. I think it's really important that we're just really simple and clear, and give our passengers clear instructions so that they can navigate this new experience. From our perspective, we're looking at ways that we can improve the experience for passengers. So for example, we're looking at our retailing and how we can reduce queuing times at stations. But very much for now, the focus for us is to transport those who have to make journeys as safely as possible, and to work with them to make sure that they're informed and confident. But moving forward, the key for us will just be to build on that confidence, and to, when it's safe to do so, bring passengers back onto our network.
Thanks, Suzanne. Natalie, you operate a number of venues across the city region. Clearly, all of them have been closed since the day of lockdown. How are your plans going? Now you've seen the new guidance from government, is that giving you more confidence?
I mean, I can't say it's given me too much confidence about reopening in July. I feel like that's potentially a little bit too soon. We are going to struggle to socially distance in some of our venues, especially big event venues that hold weddings or events for over 100 people. Some of our outdoor spaces we might be able to open with a bit of a takeaway offer and encourage social distancing there. But we're trying to make plans to kind of modify the way we operate. So we are doing things like extending the kitchens. So the kitchens are bigger, so the chefs are further apart when we do get to reopen. Removing the stage in Bold Street, for instance, so we can move the seats apart. We're trying to put in non-touching toilet sensors and taps in the bathrooms. But I feel like until we get a bit more of a steer from the government, the confidence is not really going to come back too well from the public about how we can actually deliver a safe environment. I feel like it simply just doesn't work inside a small venue.
So, I mean, one of the key things is about that reassurance, isn't it? And about how you can operate within your small venue. I know a lot of our businesses in the visitor economy, are very much those small cafe bars, which are the great places that we all like to go. I mean, obviously our pubs will be places that we won't be able to get into until we are reassured that the steps that were taken by those owners is sufficient to allow that reassurance. So in terms of, you're talking about physical restructuring within your properties.
Yeah, physically changing the way that the rooms are configured, extending spaces, as I say, trying to put less touch points in. We would encourage the local council to help us with pavement licenses that are easily, which would allow us to trade on Bold Street, for instance, where small units in Bold Street simply won't be able to reopen with social distancing because they won't be able to get enough tables and chairs in. We've obviously pre-ordered loads of PPE sanitizers, plastic screens. We're looking at an app so that you can order remotely. You don't need to come to the till. You can order at the table and place your order, pay for it, and then it gets brought out. But I feel as though a lot of these things that we can implement are still not necessarily going to give people the confidence they need. So, as I say, especially in large gatherings, so weddings, events. Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield for us. I think I'm struggling to kind of work through it because my venues go from being sort of 25 covers to 7,500 square feet. So I've got every different sort of aspect of how to mobilise 6 or 7 venues in a safe way and look after the staff and the customers, and which is the most important thing.
Great, thanks for that, Natalie. We have a number of questions that we'll come back to later, but what we would like to ask all of our participants to engage within is a poll, which really gives us an indication. We can do that now, Alvaro, if you put that poll up. Some very simple questions. If all of you could respond to this, it'll give us an indication of where we believe business sentiment is at this moment in time. So there are 3 questions. Is that right?
Yes, so we're asking you what's your main concern, and then basically what's your second and third concern, because that will help us all main stakeholders, the council, public health, to actually understand what's the key priorities for all businesses. So if you can all start completing the survey, it should take you like 10 seconds. So we leave the survey open for a minute or 2, and then we'll share all the answers.
And if we can then turn to Chris for the second half, and then we'll come. There's quite a number of chats and Q&As. Please keep doing that because we'll bring all the panelists back on for that second section, following the end of the second section. And we'll share the poll information, of course, at the end of that as well. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Bill, thanks very much. I think that that first panel, I think, sort of reiterated and reinforced, I think, the approach that we're going to have to look at here. And before I bring in John and Daniel, is that confidence is going to be a huge factor here in terms of building that in order to create the opportunities for demand and then follow that. And clearly there's a lot of uncertainties in that space. So I think very much our strategy at the moment in terms of marketing wise is going to be very much about building that confidence through the health messaging so that people feel safe, and particularly employees feel safe coming into the workplace. And then adding on to that, confidence of local people to feel confident about coming into the city centre. And from that, moving into a domestic, and then probably maybe even a year from now into more international markets. But I do strongly believe that if we don't get the confidence message right early on, then fundamentally we're in danger, as Matt was saying, about a second spike, or we're in danger of the public feeling unsafe or workers feeling unsafe coming into work. And I totally reiterate what Natalie was saying. We desperately need clearer guidance on the tourism and hospitality sector. Although that has been talked about as coming in July, we need guidance a lot earlier than that to enable businesses like Natalie's and others to open or plan with more confidence. But let's take an optimistic view here that that local confidence does start rebuilding, and we're in a position where we can start to attract visitors back to this great city again. Two of the main components of that, really critical components, are my next two panelists, and that's John Irving from John Lennon Airport and Daniel Crehan from Avanti West Coast. And therefore, what I want to basically do is just get some ideas and thoughts from them about their thoughts around how their businesses are and how they can, contribute going forward into this plan. So Daniel, let's start with Avanti in terms of how's life for you guys at the moment? What sort of you're thinking at the moment? How are you sort of reacting to the various changes going on within government? And what's your kind of message around that we can pick up as a destination?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Well, I think firstly, I'd just echo much of what Suzanne said in terms of the current position. Over the last couple of months, we've been running significantly reduced services. So around 50% of our normal timetable has been running. That hasn't impacted the hourly service that we have between London and Liverpool. That's continued to run as planned. But clearly on the services that we have been running with very minimal passengers as well. And that's no great surprise. That's actually very much what we would have wanted. And in terms of the messaging, has been very much around essential travel only. The reason that we've had the services running is really to transport key workers and those that absolutely have to travel. I think in terms of just looking ahead, next week, similarly to Suzanne, we'll be increasing our services from Monday. We are expecting a small increase in demand as people begin to return back to work across some sectors. But the message for us will continue to be very much around only travel if you have to. The focus in this first phase for us from May probably through to late summer will just be around very much addressing customer safety needs, maintaining the social distancing as well will be absolutely critical to us. And there's some work we're doing in the background at the moment just around managing capacity on individual trains and looking at capping that at certain levels to make sure that we're not overwhelmed on any services, because certainly that there would be considerable risk to doing that. I think for us, just moving, I guess, from the emergency phase, which we're operating in at the moment, in terms of the next phase of that really would be the transition back to demand beginning to increase. At the moment, as I say, timings are TBC, dependent upon the government guidance and the wider picture. But our best case scenario at the moment is that we're looking at that being the end of the summer. So August into early September is when we think that demand will start to return. But I think we'd be foolish to think that things will just be returned back to pre-COVID levels. I think that there is a need for us to acknowledge that actually the landscape has changed somewhat now. For us, I think that is really across two broad areas. So the corporate market for business travel and also leisure travel. I think the corporate market in particular, I think will be the most challenging in that clearly businesses and employees will have become accustomed to new ways of working, technology, the impact that has had in terms of productivity, work-life balance, and I think also, I guess, from a spend perspective, businesses are really mindful and cautious about where they can potentially make savings as well. So I think that there's a lot for us there to really consider at the moment. That there's lots of different insight that we're pulling together and thinking about how we need to address some of those challenges. I think there will be possibly, the traditional peak that we see may never return. We might find actually there's a lot more flexibility in terms of when business customers are looking to travel. So that's something we're building into our planning at the moment. And then I think just moving across to the leisure market, I think that probably is a slightly more rosy picture in the short term, in that we do see considerable opportunity with the staycation market. Domestic leisure, I think, will certainly be critical to our recovery planning. I think lots of the noise from the government in the last few days has been about summer holidays. Will people be able to travel abroad? Possibly not in the next few months. So we'll be looking from a leisure point of view to really hero that within our messaging, but obviously in the context of safety being first and foremost the really critical part. So I think in terms of, I know Suzanne mentioned as well about the new normal. I think for us that is almost the third phase, which we think will kick in from January 2021 onwards, is when we really think we'll start to see more travel internationally from inbound tourism. And as I say, that those new some of the new trends that we're seeing from a corporate perspective, I think that's when we'll need to be adapting to a lot of those changes on a more medium long-term basis. So for us, it's really spread across those 3 phases. So from now until late summer, very much around emergency measures, the transition from September onwards as demand recovers, and then that new normal really from Jan 2021 onwards.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. And then John, from Liverpool, John Lennon Airport. I mean, John, the airport has been a great success story for the city region over the last 2 or 3 years. Your plans for expansion were really exciting. The routes were developing, and then along comes COVID. So and we know the impact that's had on the airport. So what's your take on the state of affairs at the moment, John, and your view going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The airport's had a successful few years, which is great, and we're on a great trajectory. And then, as many businesses, obviously this has had a dramatic effect on us. And I think certainly as an industry, we're probably the first to see it starting to make an impact on our numbers and flights, and probably will be one of the last to get back to full recovery. I think certainly, what we're seeing, we're still operational right now, so we're still open. We've got 2 flights a day to the Isle of Man, managing the health contract, which is an important link. But that's instead of something like 120 flights a day that we'd probably normally have at this time of year. So the impact on us is phenomenal, and we obviously have a fairly rigid cost base. So we're working through how that looks. How do we move forward? I think as we all start to think about the ease of lockdown and recovery, I think certainly in the aviation industry there is definitely going to be a lag to that. So opening up and being easy, and I agree with Natalie, comments on confidence and people wanting to move around a city is one thing, but moving and getting on an aircraft in and out of the UK is another thing. So we're seeing and speaking with our airlines about how does recovery look, when the flights come back, when can we think that we will be back to some kind of normality, and certainly that is not going to be instant. We're talking to our 2 main airlines about June nothing, probably July domestic flights only, and that could be for a number of months, don't know. And every day, like all of us, something changes, some advice changes, or a minister says something about no holidays, and we're working kind of on a very limited amount of information, both from an airline and from an airport. We are obviously going to be under some pressure over the next few months in terms of what that looks like, both in terms of capacity, getting the airlines back and some flights back. Certainly, as I said before, domestic will come first, but also that confidence and demand, which is not just about feeling safe, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but also to do with the restrictions and quarantines that may or may not be in place for a number of weeks or months, which will impact us as a business and obviously impact any inbound traffic into Liverpool. And it's certainly something that as an airport and as an industry we've been debating and trying to push forward our thoughts on what quarantine looks like, and a definite need is it has to have a timetable against it. We can't just say there's a 14-day quarantine of entering into the UK and leave it like that. We need to know what it means. We need to know how we do it. And alongside that, as every business is, we're looking at how does the airport open in the new world in terms of social distancing, given that level of confidence and comfort that passengers can transit through the airport in a safe way, and that has been something that we can get on with and can start to plan and get things in place so that we can look at all of our main processing areas. How do we deal with staff and what do they have to have? And having some level of guidance from the government is good, which came out this week. But we're working really hard on being ready to open. When that is and what that looks like, I don't know still, which is difficult to plan on. But things like social distancing, and what's good about Liverpool Airport is we've got a lot of space. It's got a lot of areas where we can easily social distance people. We're not going to worry about the security area. We can manage that. We've got a good departure lounge. So we will be set up ready to go, Chris, in terms of what that looks like and give that confidence. But we are, like everybody, at the sort of request of the demand and the confidence coming back, as well as airlines having that confidence to put flights back into the air, never mind into Liverpool Airport. So I think if you go glass half full, we're seeing, June, July and August being very different to our normal June, July and August. But there has to be some level of build-up. The airlines are positive about the UK and Liverpool, but every day something changes, if I'm honest, and we have to be fairly nimble on what we're doing.
Well, also got you there, John. I think do you think that just building on some of the Daniel was talking about on the staycation market, that some of the low-cost operators may well consider increasing the number of domestic routes for the time being? Does that provide us as an opportunity to get increased connectivity, which would be really great from us being able to access into the domestic market? Yeah. And as a parallel to that, you've had some really, I've been very impressed with the ambitious expansion plans you had, the discussions that started around the rail link and the connectivity to the city centre. I presume they go on hold, but I would hope to think that they still stay within your vision. Yeah,
I'll answer the second bit first, Chris. I think certainly we remain an ambitious airport, and because we're part of an ambitious city region, they're definitely on hold rather than cancelled. I think we all have to look at what impact this has on the business and financial structures around us and the region. But we remain completely ambitious, and in my world, I look at that being a pause rather than we need to reassess what this looks like, because everything we've got here as an airport and everything we've got in the city region, whatever the new norm looks like, it's still some of those projects are critical to grow the airport and its connectivity. I think certainly having a rail link into the airport remains top priority, probably even more so now that there's an opportunity for us to do things differently at the airport and to offer different things because of the structure, and having more people able to access what I would classify as an ambitious, well-built airport in the Northwest could actually be an advantage for us. I think to your point on domestic travel, I think it's a great comment. We're obviously well blessed with Belfast being our biggest route, the Isle of Man, Jersey, but also Dublin, which, although it's not domestic, will be classified as domestic in terms of in and out of flights, which is a great starting point, and that's 26% of our passenger numbers in a normal world. But we are talking to our current partners and new potential partners about domestic connectivity, because what you've got to also remember outside of this is Flybe disappeared in February from the market. COVID came along and stopped people replacing it, if you like. So we're in active discussions with our current carriers about other markets to serve. The confidence and demand is always a piece of it, but it may well be, in a positive way, an opportunity to get things that were very difficult for us to get pre-COVID, if I'm honest, Chris. But yeah, we are working on that and putting ideas forward about people who still want to travel around, either from business but certainly from a leisure point of view, in and out of Liverpool, either coming here for a weekend or long weekend, or going somewhere down south or to Scotland for the same. And certainly what fills me with some confidence, although a lot of people have been working from home or furloughed, and we have a lot of people doing that, everybody, when you can, will still want to go on holiday or have a break. That's a fact. And that's why we do have some confidence that when things can get back to normal, then we start to see that.
Okay, great. And Daniel, in a similar vein, I think when Avanti won the franchise from Virgin, one of the things we were excited about was the opportunity to increase frequencies into Liverpool, particularly that Liverpool-London link, the opportunities at South Parkway where that platform might be extended like it was done when there was temporary work going on. Do those ambitions still, if everything begins to move in the right direction, do those ambitions still sit very much square in within the Avanti planning and processing?
Yeah, sure. So absolutely, Chris. Those are still very much part of the longer term plan today. We've ordered a new fleet of trains, which have been earmarked for the additional Liverpool-London service from December 2022 onwards. And within the scope of that as well, it is for one of those hourly services to then call at South Parkway. I think clearly we need to work with the Department of Transport on this, and also the Office of Road and Rail as well, for relevant approvals and so on. There's activities we'll need to do with them over the next couple of years to do that. But yeah, certainly the aspiration for us at the moment is still very much that would kick in from December 2022. Okay, great. Also, we're in early conversations also with John Lennon Airport actually as well to maximise that opportunity on a longer term basis. Okay, great guys. I mean, I think it's good to know that, you know, despite the challenges that they have, the vision, the ambition, and the aspirations of you as operators and at the airport still remain, you know, as being key elements. We'll have to grab for these positive moments for the future. Yeah? So, Bill, I'll hand you back from this panel now for us to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you for all of those questions. Alvaro, if you could just put up the response to the poll, because clearly we've asked you as key members of the visitor economy, all of those on this call today, really to see what are your current concerns about moving towards reopening. You'll see that, we'll share this later, but clearly social distancing and customer anxieties leading to low footfall and productivity is a primary concern for businesses. The behaviour leading to compliance problems again, and also on that third question is the cost of implementing some of these measures. Now, there've been a number of questions. In fact, we've got a number of questions that, if I could just come back to Suzanne, we've had a couple of questions about social distancing in stations. Particularly we know about Hamilton Square, James Street, and then also about how do we provide access for all within Merseyrail.
Yeah, so the position nationally is that it won't always be possible to socially distance when travelling by public transport, which is why we're focused on the messages of wear face coverings if you can, have good hand hygiene, and travel responsibly. We do have a tactical team who will look at all of our stations and will be closely monitoring crowd management moving forward. So we're already putting plans in place to manage passenger flow at our stations, and it is something that we will be monitoring as our numbers start to increase. With regards to any passengers that require assisted travel, so they are it's important that we continue to support those people who need assistance during their journeys. So we have an assisted travel team who can help passengers to plan their journey. Passengers do require assistance boarding and alighting our trains. So the focus around that is to work with staff and our passengers, looking at face coverings, looking at good hand hygiene, and just ensuring safety while passengers are being assisted. Looking to the future, though, our new fleet of trains that come in will have a slide and step technology, which means that any passengers in a wheelchair will be able to board an alight train without needing any assistance from staff. So those new technologies in the future will help us in these circumstances.
Thanks, Suzanne. So again, it's a question of obviously reviewing the current guidance, continuing to monitor how the system operates and how we can really all work together on this moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And just with regards to enforcement, so our staff actually can't enforce social distancing, and they're there in an advisory role to help passengers. Our teams, our revenue protection team and our Carlisle security teams have been out on the network advising passengers regarding non-essential journeys, and that's something we will continue. We also work closely with the British Transport Police as well, who can enforce any issues around social distancing. So, for example, over the past weeks, we've been doing joint operations at beaches where we've seen an increase in non-essential journeys, and this is something that we'll continue to do moving forward.
Thanks, Suzanne. Natalie, if I can come back to you, there've been a couple of people have raised the issues that you talked to about the fact that if you could open up onto Bowl Street itself, then that would be a great opportunity for Leith. I mean, pedestrianisation and allowing greater use of public space clearly has a benefit for business in being able to increase the number of covers within it. Is that something you particularly look to do in both Bold Street, but also Old Hall Street. I know Old Hall Street has a great outside area, but you potentially look as if you could extend that if you could.
Yeah, well, our priority is going to be to get open the venues that currently have outdoor space first, because we won't be able to reopen all of the venues at the same time. So Leaf West Kirby has got a big garden, big car park. That'll be the first one that we reopen. Hopefully the roof terrace at Omi Omai, but we need to work out how on earth to get people onto the roof. And Old Hall Street, which has the seating area outside. But for the other venues that don't have any seating, it would be a real help to help us increase capacity and give customers the confidence that they need, that they're in fresh air. If we could get some relaxation on pavement licenses or pedestrianisation, and then maybe further down the line, help facilitate markets or some way of us trading it in a way that is not in an enclosed, confined space. So, you know, markets that are in, you know, parks or the city centre, you know, open spaces, something like that, really.
Great, thanks, Natalie. I mean, part of the work that's being done at this moment in time is about how we open up the city, and very much at the heart of that is planning around opening up the city centre, particularly pedestrianising those areas. So it'd be good to, clearly we will work with all of the restaurants and premises that have the ability to do that. But also it's about opening up the ability for people to use alternate means of transport. And again, Matthew, there's been a number of questions about bicycles. We know and are very keen to ensure that security is paramount in there, and there's an operational group that's already discussing the issues around cycle safety as we seek to use cycles more. The question particularly about the bike to work scheme, if the employer doesn't support it, we will look at that, whether we as a city can provide some support into that. But that's a question that we will pick up on that. Chris, do you want to just pick up on what's happening around marketing, particularly the role of marketing Liverpool in looking at how we start opening up the city and how we coordinate the response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've got to try and ensure is that our messaging is as consistent as we can get it, because I think that if we're going to build confidence, there's going to be consistent messaging. That doesn't matter whether it's starts with getting on a Merseyrail train or coming through an airport or coming in through bus or whatever. We've got to get that consistent messaging so people feel safe about coming into the city centre, and that I think is a lot of what we're trying to do with Matt. And I think then there's the bit about making sure that the businesses themselves are equipped with as much intelligence and knowledge that they have to be able to offer the services effectively. And I do think there is some really big opportunities inside the city centre to reimagine our city centre a bit. I would hope that we can get some really quick movement on things like pavement licenses and pedestrianisation, using open space as effectively as possible. I think that will all help as part of the confidence building and potentially leading to giving us a different city going forward. I think we have to have our domestic strategy and our audience development strategy ready to go. So I think it's not a question of waiting for that. It's about the timing of it is the critical factor. And that's why it's going to be really important to work with the likes of the airport, Avanti and other rail operators so that they know what those plans are as we are progressing them. What I want to stay away from at the moment, I think, is about putting a timeline on that and saying it's going to be this date, it's going to be that date. I think we need to assess coming out of this, because we are in a survival phase here still, about beginning to understand how many businesses can come back and in what shape they can come back. So that still has to be remembered as a critical part of this. And then we'll start to build the demand as the confidence moves. It's going to be very important for us around things like business tourism, the ACC, the areas like that, about how we start getting conventions and conferences coming back in. Football will be a key factor within that as well. So I think we're going to have our plans ready, but I'm very sure that we aren't going to basically be out there aggressively pushing those plans until we're very confident that the health messaging and that point that Matt mentioned earlier, that we're not leading ourselves into potentially building a demand that could lead to a second spike in the Liverpool area. And if that happens, then we're definitely back to square one, and we've got to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Chris. There are a number of questions, and if I can just answer, there's a question about my business will be required to create a form of queuing system outside the premises. What support from the council will businesses have with this? Exactly is one of the issues that we're currently considering in the operational discussions and the planning that is forming between ourselves in Liverpool Bid Company, Liverpool One and the City Council on how we manage that queuing, because that's very important that we have safe queuing. Government produced some excellent documentation. One of those, and again, the links for that are on our websites, is about how we manage public space and how city centres and urban centres can open up again. So very much the fact that, yes, we want to manage queues in the city centre so people can queue safely without disturbance and how they can access buildings. So that will be picked up on that. I would, so the question about nurseries, Matt, whether you can answer that one. Is there anything there particularly? And government are looking at and have task force set up for sectors. I'll come back to you in a moment. Just a question about hotels. What help are we going to give to hotels in the city centre? Well, we're working on a daily basis with Liverpool Hospitality Association and the hoteliers, very much working on that at this moment in time. So again, it's about how hotels can operate safely. And when the guidance comes out, as it's starting to come now, we'll be working with those hoteliers to enable them to provide the same reassurance. And just also about the question about council support. What support is the council providing to business? Well, the council has been providing significant support to businesses in the terms that it's about £75 million that the council have been able to get out quite quickly in grant form. But there is also business support both on the growth platform website, where you can secure business support through there, or also within the council's own website. So there's a lot of support that is happening at this moment in time. And clearly more support is needed and will continue to be. One of the things that we are continuing to lobby for, both on a local and national level, is about the fact that the visitor economy will be the slowest and hardest to come out, probably hardest hit and slowest to come out. There are a number of other questions on there. We will respond to those and post those responses so you can particularly have that. There's a final question there about university representation. Yes, we are very concerned about universities, and LVEN, which I chair, which is the Liverpool Visitor Economy Network, is meeting on a weekly basis. The universities are represented in there. We're coming towards 1 o'clock. Matt, do you have anything that you wanted to enclose?
So just that it strikes me that we need to slowly emerge from lockdown and build confidence across the whole city, both in terms of business, visitors, and also residents, and do that kind of with everybody together. So we've got those clear messages about what we're doing, why we're doing, and what it's going to look like. There probably is a roadmap, an 18-month, 2-year roadmap here that needs to be thought through. I don't think everything's going to get back to normal on the 1st of July, and I don't think anybody else should be thinking that either. It's probably more, what does the world look like living with COVID, rather than what does the world look like getting over COVID. And so it's useful just to think that through, because within that, there will be great opportunities. There will be opportunities to do things better and differently than before. Cycling is a great example of that. Street dining, much more kind of European style of eating, is a great example, and there will be other things. So that's probably where I'd finish, is it's not all bleak. We will get over it. It will take time. It's probably a stepped approach, and there's opportunities within that.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. And thanks to all our panelists, and particularly all of our participants today. Please keep sending the questions in. We'll respond to all of these and post it on both Liverpool Bid website and Marketing Liverpool.